Capcom presents
Ready?
Marvel vs. Capcom 2 New Age of Heroes.
I just really wanted to talk about Marvel vs. Capcom for a bit. Little known fact about me, but I love fighting games. For well over a decade at this point, I have been enamored by just about every aspect of the fighting game genre. From character design to gameplay, music, sound, visuals, there's just something about fighting games that scratches such a specific itch in my mind that makes me go absolutely crazy for them. Now, does that mean I'm any good at them? No. I love fighting games, but I would hardly say I'm a professional. I like to think I'm at least decent at most fighters, but as soon as I think that, some guy has dedicated his entire life to the game enters the room and curb stomps me into the dirt. Regardless, I still love fighting games, whether they be big, small, AAA, indie, and all the weird stuff in between. So long as the game's fun, I'm gonna have a pretty great time. And there's no fighting game that exemplifies pure fun as much as Marvel vs. Capcom. What started off as a simple partnership between two pop culture icons of the mid-90s has blossomed into a spectacle of high-flying, over-the-top tag team fighting game goodness that practically single-handedly defined an entire subgenre of fighters that is still going strong to this day. While Street Fighter and Smash Bros. Helped to introduce me to fighting games, Marvel vs. Capcom is what really solidified my love for them. So today, to celebrate that love, I thought it would be fun to envision what I would like to see in the next Marvel vs. Capcom game. The last entry of the series was in 2017, and disregarding a few arcade 1-up cabinets, Marvel Legends figures that aren't MVC branded but also totally are, and an arcade collection that I'm still not totally convinced is actually real, the series has been totally dormant in terms of any new releases. To be fair, I don't know how anyone is supposed to follow up the dumpster fire that is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, but nowadays Capcom's fighting game division is in a much healthier spot, and Marvel is much more willing to allow game devs to go absolutely crazy with their characters. So the idea of a new Marvel vs. Capcom is far more exciting than it may have been a few years ago. So with all that in mind, one must ask the question, could a new Marvel vs. Capcom game actually happen? Nope. Yeah, in case you've been living under a rock the past several months, Marvel has partnered with Arc System Works, aka one of, if not the biggest name in fighting games right now, to create a 4v4 tag team fighting game titled Dokkan Fighting Souls. And it looks absolutely amazing. The gameplay, presentation, and visuals look absolutely stellar and everything that I would want out of a new Marvel vs. Capcom game, even if it's not made by Capcom. Regardless of anything I say today, Dokkan looks like it's going to be a fun time. I just wish it didn't mean that MVC was going to be put on ice for the next 5 to 10 years. When you're a company as big as Marvel, it's probably not best to have two mechanically similar video games competing with one another. So because of that, we're probably not going to see a new Marvel vs. Capcom for quite some time. You know, unless the game bombs or something. But damn it, I don't care. I love this series, I love these companies. Mostly. And I want to share my ideas for a new Marvel game anyway. A hypothetical Marvel vs. Capcom game has floated around in my brain for quite some time now. So much so that it's become something of a running joke in my friend group given how often I make character rosters for it. Well, hopefully by getting my ideas out into the world I can satiate that hunger for a new Marvel game, but you know, probably not. So today I'm going to lay out my ideas for a potential new Marvel vs. Capcom game, going into just about every aspect from the gameplay to the visuals to stage selection and of course the character roster. Before getting started though, I just want to state that this is all just a fun little thought experiment and also just my opinion. This is how I would make a Marvel vs. Capcom game, not how you would make one. So if my takes upset you, whoops. I kid, obviously. If you have your own ideas for a new Marvel game, feel free to share them. I love seeing what other people want out of a new MVC game. It's honestly kind of an obsession for me. Me from under the skin, seriously? Okay, with all that out of the way, let's discuss how I would make the next Marvel vs. Capcom game, starting with everything that isn't the game's roster. Yeah, I know, the character roster is arguably the thing most people are interested in for a new Marvel vs. Capcom, but the fact of the matter is we have a lot of aspects of the game to talk about before we actually dive into what characters made the cut. To start, I want to recap a bit of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite's shortcomings because it's going to be a big driving force for how we design this game. I know reliving Marvel Infinite may bring up some painful memories, so I'll try to keep this brief. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite released in June 2017 and basically had zero opportunities to actually succeed for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to a lacking visual art style, a subpar roster size when compared to other games in the series, a complete lack of X-Men and Fantastic Four representation due to Disney trying to bury the IP so 20th Century Fox would relinquish the film rights back to them, an absolutely pitiful budget equaling to less than half of what one season of Street Fighter V DLC would have costed, and last of all, a lackluster cinematic story mode that excited nobody and probably only ate up more of the aforementioned small budget size. Take all these factors into account and throw in how Dragon Ball FighterZ completely cannibalized any goodwill the game might have had going for it, and yeah, it's no wonder why it only got half a year's worth of support before falling off the face of the planet. Couldn't even make it to EVO. Poor bastard. So yeah, there's definitely a lot to learn from Infinite's failure, with the big key point being that you need to give your devs plenty of time and money to actually make a worthwhile product. What a concept! For a project like this, we should look to another Capcom-made fighting game to see how something like this should be handled financially. While we don't know what the exact budget for Street Fighter VI was, we do know that development for the game started way back in 2018, meaning it took about 5 years for the game to fully release. A new Marvel vs. Capcom game, which we are just going to call Marvel vs. Capcom 4 so as not to remind everyone that Marvel Infinite exists, should absolutely take this approach, especially considering how successful Street Fighter VI has been for the franchise. Now, I know that technically means that a new Marvel vs. Capcom game, assuming it started development today, wouldn't release until sometime in the 2030s at the earliest, but let's not think about that right now, okay? Alright, so we have a general scope for the game, that being something on par with, if not a little bit bigger than Street Fighter VI, so what would the game look and play like? Each Marvel vs. Capcom game up to this point has had a very unique visual and gameplay identity when compared to the last, which helped to make each new entry stand out in a big way. Even Infinite, despite looking f***ing hideous, at least has a really unique gameplay style that helps it stand out when compared to Ultimate Marvel 3. Gameplay-wise, the big debate I see is whether or not the next Marvel game should stick with 2v2 like Infinite did, or go back to the 3v3 style of Marvel 3. I love the active tag system of Infinite, but I'll fully admit that I'm a much bigger fan of the chaos that the 3v3 style can bring. So what gameplay style would I go with? Easy. Both. What if we had a gameplay system similar to what Skullgirls or Capcom vs. SNK 2 has, where you get to choose between 1 to 3 characters for your team, with a number of characters having its own unique strengths and weaknesses when compared to the others? Let's break it down. Having 3 characters on your team would make the gameplay pretty similar to Marvel 2 and 3, with you ultimately doing less damage and having less health, but having much more combo potential with assists alongside far more team building possibilities. Picking 2 characters would give you the active tag system from Infinite with a few more limitations but a much larger damage output than if you were to pick 3 characters for your team. And for my craziest idea, picking just 1 character on your team would give you tons of health and damage, alongside potentially giving you unique assists or maybe even giving you Infinity Stone power-ups, making the game sort of a mixture between Marvel Superheroes, Marvel vs. Capcom 1, and Marvel Infinite. In the grand scheme of things, I'm essentially pitching a combination of the groove and ratio system from the Capcom vs. SNK series, where your choice of characters and playstyles would greatly change how you play the game, providing an infinite amount of experimentation and replayability in discovering new team compositions and groove pairings. Now, I know this idea sounds kind of insane and would take a ton of tinkering in order to make everything somewhat balanced, but a big thing I want for the next Marvel vs. Capcom is for it to feel like a celebration of everything that came before, and I think there's no better way of doing that than essentially bringing in the gameplay styles of all the previous titles into this new one. If my idea just isn't feasible, then I'm sure some actual professional game designers could come up with a new exciting gameplay system on their own. Or they could always just steal Tokon's 4v4 if they really wanted to. As one final note on the gameplay, I was debating on if adding a comeback mechanic like X Factor in Marvel 3 would be worthwhile, but throwing in something like that on top of the several other gameplay systems I pitched could make things a little too complicated. So maybe heavily nerfing it or just limiting it to 1 character teams could help to make things somewhat balanced for the player base. Can you tell I'm not a game designer yet? Art style, arguably the 3rd most important aspect of a fighting game behind its gameplay and roster. I have a couple of different ideas as to how the game could look, but really anything's better than what Marvel Infinite's cinematic MCU-inspired art style is going for. God, I'll never get over how this game looks. The most obvious art style for a new game would be to update Marvel 3's comic cell shading by making the shadows less dark and adding some more stylization to make it actually look more like a comic book. But if that's an approach you're willing to take, then maybe just doing a straight up hand-drawn art style kind of like what Skullgirls had could work. Look, okay, I love Skullgirls and I wish more games looked like it, but I know that's a bit of a pipe dream. You could always go back to a pixel art style like what the older games in the series have. I know pixel art in the traditional sense for fighting games is kind of dead, but I don't know, I feel like there's a market for a new big budget pixel art based fighting game in today's industry. Though maybe that's just the BlazBlue fan in me. Please make a new BlazBlue. And for a final art style suggestion, you could always just go for a sort of comic pop style like what Fatal Fury City of the Wolves or Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite and Beyond did. Can't really beat what's proven to already work, and imitation is the best form of flattery after all. To reiterate though, pretty much any art style direction is better than base Infinites, so just try to have fun with it and put a little thought into the presentation and everything should be fine. Okay, we've gone over the scope of the game, the gameplay, the art style, even the title. I think it's finally time to dive into the roster of characters for what a potential Marvel vs. Capcom 4 could look like. The cast of characters in a fighting game is easily the most important aspect of the entire package, and for Marvel vs. Capcom specifically, making a new roster is an incredibly tall task, since there are so many beloved characters from both of these companies that fans would kill to see in these games. I try to do my best, but I know for a fact that there's a ton of big names that are missing from both Marvel and Capcom on my roster. Just try not to hurt me too much over my picks, okay? Before we dive into that though, we need to figure out how many characters will actually be in Marvel vs. Capcom 4. If we take the average of every Marvel vs. Capcom game up to this point, including the 2 standalone Marvel games and secret characters like Hyperspeed Venom or Norimaru, that gives you an average of about 30 characters. Which is the exact number of characters that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite launched with. Yeah, that's not gonna work. 30 characters in my opinion is far too small for a game like this. I know fighting game rosters have only gotten smaller and smaller as development time and costs continue to rise, but a big aspect of the series has always been larger roster sizes, and one of Infinite's biggest criticisms was having a smaller roster when compared to Ultimate and even Vanilla Marvel 3. So here's what I came up with. For Marvel vs. Capcom 4, I think there should be no fewer than 40 characters for the base roster. This would make it larger than Vanilla Marvel 3's and Infinite's rosters, and is around the same amount of characters as other big budget fighting games like KOF 15 and Mortal Kombat 11 have. Ignore how MK1 only launched with 22 characters. Personally speaking, I think the roster should try and push for 50 characters since that would help to make it more appealing and would give Capcom more good graces after Infinite, but I tried to be a little realistic with the roster size, so 40 it is. Also, since someone will bring it up, yes, Marvel Infinite did have 60 character slots in its files, but we don't know why all of those were removed, nor is it feasible to expect a modern day fighting game to launch with a base roster of that size, especially in today's video game landscape. As appealing as it would be to pull a Smash Ultimate and bring back every character the game before on top of like 6 or so new characters, it just isn't feasible with a series like this, what with there already being nearly 100 playable characters and whatnot. Also, let's be honest, not every character really deserves to come back. I'm sorry, Surfbot and Boneclaw Wolverine. So 40 characters it is, 12 new and 28 old, that first number being based on the average number of new fighters we typically see in a new game for the series. A 40 character roster should be enough of a good variety between the classics, new hotness, and all the X-Men characters who we have to magically reintroduce to the series after Infinite cut them out entirely. Well, no more stalling, here's my roster for Marvel vs. Capcom 4. Starting on the Marvel side, we have Iron Man, Captain America, Spider-Man, Hulk, and Thor. These guys are in literally everything. It would feel weird if they weren't in this game. I don't really feel like I need to elaborate any further, though maybe we could give Thor a new moveset since he's never been a fan favorite in the series. Onto the X-Men, we have Wolverine, Cyclops, and Storm as our main hero reps. The X-Men were really difficult to choose characters for since so many of them are massive fan favorites and deserve to be in this franchise. However, a lot of the earlier Marvel vs. Capcom games kind of have too many X-Men characters, and I didn't want to face that problem here, so I had to make a lot of difficult cuts in the end. There will be more mutants later on though, these are just the ones I picked to represent the main X-Men team. Next up, Deadpool. Yeah, the merc with a mouth is kind of a big deal in Marvel 3, and his new movie did gangbusters, so I think he's earned a spot on the base roster. Then we have Black Panther, a very important character with a massive fan following that kind of needs to be on the roster. Though I will admit that I did go back and forth a lot on if Doctor Strange or Captain Marvel should take a spot instead. I ultimately ended up cutting those two though, primarily because Strange has already been in a few of these games, and as fun as Carol is in Infinite, I just really couldn't justify putting her in over Black Panther. And for the rest of the returning Marvel characters, we have the villains: Venom, Doctor Doom, Magneto, and Sentinel. Doctor Doom and Magneto are pillars of the Marvel vs. Capcom series, so it's kind of a no-brainer that they'd be here. Venom is also massively popular, and I threw Sentinel in here since he's quite notable in the Marvel 2 competitive scene and would help to appeal to that audience, alongside being a good jobber enemy if we decide to do a story mode for this game. On the Capcom side, we have Ryu, Chun-Li, Morgan, and Strider Hiryu. These characters are kind of staples of Capcom crossover games, so I think it makes sense to include them here. For some of the more popular characters, we have Dante, Phoenix Wright, Zero, and Monster Hunter. Dante and Zero really need no explanation since they're absolutely massive characters both in and out of their respective franchises, and wouldn't need much justification for being here, though I would love it if we could finally retire Dante's DMC3 moveset in favor of one based around how he plays in DMC5. Phoenix Wright and Monster Hunter are also two absolutely huge characters that would appeal to giant audiences, so it makes sense to include them here. Similar to Dante, maybe Monster Hunter could receive some tweaks to better fit in with the newer games in the series like World, Rise, or Wilds. Next up is Akuma. If you know the history of Marvel vs. Capcom, then you know that Akuma is vitally important to its conception, and is one of the few characters that has been in nearly every single Marvel vs. Capcom game, so yeah, he's getting in here. Then we have Albert Wesker, one of Capcom's biggest bad guys, and one that I know people would love to see return to this franchise. Initially I was going to throw in another villain with M. Bison, but the more I thought about it, the more I started to change my mind. To tell you the truth, I'm a little sick of M. Bison showing up and stuff because I kind of want Street Fighter to try and make some new big bads instead of sticking with the one from Street Fighter 2 that is famous for getting his ass kicked by the cooler villain of Street Fighter 2. But Capcom's obsession with SF2 is a completely different topic that I don't really want to get into right now. All of this is to say that instead of M. Bison, I decided to put in Zangief, mostly because he's a grappler and I really don't want Mike Hagar in the game's base roster for similar reasons why I cut Strange from the Marvel side. That was a very roundabout way to justify a Street Fighter 2 character making a no-no for another Street Fighter 2 character. For the last few picks, I've got Amaterasu and Jill Valentine. I already had Ami on my previous stream rosters long before Okami 2 even got announced, so now she's practically a shoo-in to be included here. And then we got Jill Valentine, but she won't be the RE5 version from Marvel 3, rather she'll be the classic RE1 themed Jill from Marvel 2. Jill was a character I went back and forth on a lot, not because I thought Resident Evil was overrepresented or anything, but because I felt like there are other characters that are a bit more interesting than her. However, I think bringing her back would help to appease the Frank West fans that might be upset that he got cut, and you can even update her a bit to have her appear as she does in the RE remakes. Just make sure she still has her STARS outfit as her default look in the game though, because that design is mwah, chef's kiss. And then finally for the last Capcom returning character, Mega Man. Oh Mega Man, you deserve so much and get so little. It's kind of a shame Mega Man isn't in more of these games considering he was one of Capcom's biggest mascots at one point. But it looks like his time is finally now, as Capcom seemingly wants to do more with the franchise again, with a brand new game getting announced very recently. So let's bring the Blue Bomber back to Marvel to celebrate, preferably with an updated moveset, potentially based on Mega Man 11, Dual Override, or hell, even Smash Brothers, given how celebrated his inclusion was to that series. So those are all the returning characters on the Marvel and Capcom sides, and overall I think the picks are mostly good. There's definitely a few big names missing, but not so many that it feels like there's a gaping hole in the roster or anything. It's probably a little too safe, but it has been a while since Infinite, so I think it's fine to play things a little safe. However, that's obviously not the end, because now we have the 12 newcomers to go through, and for these, I'm not going to go super in depth on a moveset for all of them. I'm just going to talk about why I think they're good fits, a few things I would do with them, and so on and so forth. So let's just get right into it, starting with probably the most obvious character,
Star-Lord. Who?
Star-Lord. Apologies for the lack of fanfare, but I wanted to get this one out of the way early just because he's already in Tokon, so you can already kind of imagine how he would play like in Marvel. And spoiler alert, this won't be the last time I'll be saying something like this. An idea that I originally had for Star-Lord was to make his gameplay similar to how that single-player Guardians of the Galaxy game played, wherein you would have command over all of the main Guardians during combat. So basically imagine if on top of all of his normals and elemental gun-based moves, he would maybe have a couple of special inputs where characters like Gamora, Drax, Groot, or Rocket could join in Peter's main attacks, and then they could all come together for a big level 3 hyper combo. Essentially, I wanted to turn Star-Lord into the Captain Ginyu of Marvel vs. Capcom. And yeah, the idea is a little crazy, but I think it would have been a really creative way to represent all of the main Guardians of the Galaxy without having to commit to making them unique characters on the roster. The only problem with the idea though is that if you did want to make those characters playable as DLC at some point, then you would probably have to find a way to change the models to a different member of the Guardians from the comics, so as not to confuse players during matches, which in turn would have greatly increased the workload for this one character. So I don't know, I definitely think the idea is doable, but it's probably not very ideal in the grand scheme of things, so it's probably just best to base his moveset on how he plays in Tokon. Originally, I also had Miss Marvel on my roster, but I decided to ultimately cut her because Marvel's made it pretty evident over the last couple of years that they don't know what to do with her anymore. And because she's also in Tokon, so you can just play her there. For our first Capcom newcomer, we have the feline from Monster Hunter. Okay, hear me out for a second. I'm aware that this is a very unconventional pick, and to be honest, it's one that took some time to grow on me as well. The feline slash palico from Monster Hunter are mainstays of the franchise and are undoubtedly iconic. But I was really conflicted on if there would even be enough to pull from to make them stand out when compared to the Monster Hunter's moveset. However, the more I thought about it, the more I fell in love with the idea of a feline being a part of this roster. For one, there are plenty of attacks and skills in Monster Hunter that are exclusive to them, which would ultimately help to make them a great trap slash support fighter, similar to how they act during hunts in their home series. I imagine them being similar to how Rocket Raccoon plays in Marvel 3, but maybe with a couple more support mechanics that could heal your teammates, or debuff the enemy to make your attack stronger. If that's not interesting enough, then you could always have one of the smaller monsters from the series join in for some of the feline's attacks, or maybe even let them ride a Palamute or Sekra on the occasion. Regardless, Monster Hunter is definitely big enough to justify having two characters from it, and while having one of the monsters from the series be playable in Marvel would be cool, I think scale-wise there would be a couple of issues with translating them well into a fighting game. Therefore, I think it would be better to turn one of the monsters into a boss fight or something. I mean, that's pretty much what they are in their home series after all. In the end, I think felines would be a really great weird pick for a Marvel vs. Capcom game, and I believe they fit in very well with the wacky antics of Marvel as a whole.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Next up from Marvel, we have the Daywalker Blade. Oh, Blade, what are they doing to you? In case you don't know, Blade is a very popular vampire hunter that Marvel has been fumbling with constantly as of late. His movie has been lingering in development hell since 2019, with recent reports saying that it's been flat out cancelled. And he has a solo game in development, but it's hard to say what the status of that is, given how we have nothing but an announcement trailer to go off of. But hey, he's fun on Marvel Rivals at least, and people seem to like his appearance in that Marvel Zombie show, so let's take whatever good faith we can muster and throw him into the base roster. To be honest, Blade was also another late addition to my roster, mostly because I was saving him for DLC over concern that there would be too many sword slash gun guys in the base roster, you know, with Dante being here and all. Though I can't deny that it would be great to see how Blade interacts with the Capcom characters, and I'm sure you can emphasize other vampire killing weaponry for his moveset if you're concerned about him not standing out that much. Plus, with him being a half vampire, you could implement lifesteal slash drain mechanics, which would make him incredibly deadly to go up against when paired with his superhuman speed, strength, and durability. Overall, Blade can be an incredibly versatile character with loads of moveset potential beyond guns and sword slashes, and regardless, Marvel kinda owes putting him into this game after all the crap that the Blade movie has been going through. Seriously, he's a guy that kills vampires, why can't Marvel make a movie around that? Back to Capcom, we have John Talbane from Darkstalkers. Every Marvel vs. Capcom game tends to add a new Darkstalker to the roster, and for this one I decided to go with the Kung Fu Werewolf himself that has long been requested to join this franchise. I was super close to adding Lord Raptor as a new Darkstalkers rep since I personally find him a lot more interesting, and I think he would mesh in well with the Marvel side. But John ultimately won out in the end since I know he is far more popular and would work as a suitable replacement for Felicia, who I ultimately had to cut. Anyway, John comes directly from a fighting game, which means that a lot of what he does in Darkstalkers would carry over to this game. Fast and frenetic punches and kicks at the cost of health and range, just like any good rushdown character would have. Apologies if my description of John isn't all that interesting, but to tell you the truth, I haven't played a ton of Darkstalkers, and as a slight spoiler for what may come later, it's a little boring to describe how a fighting game character would play in Marvel when so much of their toolkit is already present in the series they come from. Regardless, I could see John Talbane being a crazy fun, crazy fast character in Marvel vs. Capcom, and it's a little shocking that he hasn't made it into more crossover games in the past.
I'm Daredevil. Not even God can stop that now.
For the next Marvel newcomer, we have Daredevil. I feel like Daredevil kind of speaks for himself as to why he would make it into this game. He's probably the biggest high-profile Marvel character that hasn't been a part of this series yet. And like Blade, his moveset is pretty easy to envision. Give him lots of acrobatics and agility while making him an absolute monster on the ground with his billy clubs and hard-hitting punches, kind of like how he is in Rivals. It might be a little tough incorporating his heightened senses into the gameplay of a fighting game, but if push comes to shove, you could always get lazy and use it for a counter or something. Regardless, Daredevil's a massive character who absolutely deserves to be in a fighting game, and seeing how he'd bounce off a fellow lawyer like Phoenix Wright would also be incredible to see.
I like it. I can feel the waves of ki energy surging through my whole body. So, let's go kill something.
For our next Capcom character that comes from a fighting game, we have Juri Han from Street Fighter. Street Fighter has come back in a big way these past few years thanks to Street Fighter 6, so it makes sense to add a new character from that game, but there's just one little problem with that. I don't think a lot of the new characters from 6 would be great in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. Okay, I think Jamie, Kimberly, JP, and Lily would be cool, but if we're going to be 100% realistic here, the character from Street Fighter 6 that would most likely make it into a Marvel vs. Capcom game is Luke, and I just don't see him working all that well in a game like this. I'm sure there are ways you can make Luke really fun on Marvel vs. Capcom, but for me, I think I'll just stick with who is easily the most popular character to come out of the series within the last couple of installments, if not one of the most popular characters in all of Capcom's history, which brings us to Juri. She's extremely popular, would bring in a unique moveset with plenty of games to draw moves from, and her inclusion would add a more antagonistic female character to the roster, which is always a good thing. Plus, I know her fans are heavily devoted to her, so throwing her into the base roster would greatly increase the sales of the title. You might have to adjust how her feng shui engine works mechanically, but otherwise Juri is just a slam dunk, no-brainer choice for a Marvel vs. Capcom game.
I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose.
For our next Marvel newcomer, we have the God of Mischief himself, Loki. I went back and forth a lot on if Loki would be interesting enough to be a character in a Marvel game, but after a lot of deliberation, I started to really warm up to the idea. I think giving him a ton of tricks, teleports, knife throws, backstabs, illusions, and so on would make him a crazy unique character, and he definitely has the popularity to back him up as well. True to his title, Loki would be an insanely mischievous trickster character that could have a ton of different options for combat, but would ultimately be lacking in terms of damage and durability. I wouldn't really know what to do for his level 3 hyper combo though. Maybe you have a bunch of illusions gang up on you or something. Either way, Loki is definitely deserving enough to be in a Marvel vs. Capcom game and has loads of potential for a creative and unique moveset, so I say let's add him in.
Now, let's take a look at him. Well, Ethan Winters. You escaped my little brother's idiot games, did you? Let's see how special you are.
Back to Capcom, we have Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil Village. Talk about a character that made a huge splash, even if her screen time was ultimately rather small in the game she came from. Lady D is easily one of the most popular new Capcom characters from the 2020s, so much so that Capcom still works with the character's actress for promos and advertisements. So to celebrate that, and because we need a more monster-like Resident Evil villain, let's add her to the base roster. Like with Feline, Lady D was another character that needed a bit of time to grow on me. Her combat potential might be a little limited beyond grabs, throws, and claw slashes, but I think she would be an incredibly imposing character to face off against, especially if you incorporate her dragon form into her moveset. On top of that, you could incorporate the other 4 lords from Village into her supers, or even bring in her daughters for a couple of attacks as well. Plus, imagine Blade getting to face off against Lady D alongside fighting Jill and Wesker. Hell, with Jill, Wesker, and Lady D all being on the same team, you have pretty much all generations of Resident Evil represented. You have the classic PS1 era, the more action-packed Xbox 360 era, and the first-person era that's still going on today. Now, if only there was a character that could bridge the gap between all of these eras.
To me, my X-Men.
Alright, back to Marvel, and I think we're due for a new X-Men rep, but there's so many options to choose from. There are a ton of mutants people want to see in this series. Jubilee, Beast, Emma Frost, Bishop, Armor, Beak. Okay, maybe not Beak. The point is, every X-Men is someone's favorite, so it's easily one of the most difficult groups to pick a new character from. But I think ultimately it comes down to 2 options, Nightcrawler and Magic. And as much as I would like to pick the character I think would be the most fun in a game like this, I'm going to stick with a character who definitely has the biggest fan base going around right now. Magic's explosion into the mainstream has really been a sight to behold. She went from being one of the more obscure characters in the comics, going so far as being dead in continuity for over 2 decades, to now being one of the faces of the franchise who appears in all of the books and has gotten tons of exposure thanks to Marvel Rivals. She does slightly fall into the Blade category of me being a little concerned about there being another sword user on the roster, but her mutant ability and magical powers would give her a lot more tools to utilize in combat beyond simple sword swings, and Darkchild as an install super just writes itself. In the end, while I would prefer to see Nightcrawler get into a Marvel vs. Capcom game, I can't deny that Magic's time is now, so we might as well capitalize while the iron is hot. And also because she's already in Tokon.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Next is Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil. It is baffling how Leon Kennedy, one of Capcom's most popular characters from 2 of their most beloved titles of all time, has never joined this series as a playable character. It's just insane to me. So I say let's finally retire Chris and let Leon have his long-deserved time in the spotlight. For his moves and appearance, we'd obviously have him be based on how he appears in Resident Evil 4, both the remake and the original. So that means spinning kicks, knife stabs, suplexes, and a whole lot of fire alarms to work with. If you're desperate for other moves, you could borrow some elements from his appearances in RE2, RE6, and maybe even RE9. But I think pulling from both RE4s would be more than enough to create a fun moveset. Plus, basing Leon on that game specifically means you could occasionally have Ashley join in for assistance, similar to how Maya worked for Phoenix Wright in Marvel 3.
His internal organs are completely solid.
How bad is it? You know, I used to smoke.
And for our final Marvel character, we have Ben Grimm, aka The Thing. It's kind of crazy how none of the core Fantastic Four members have ever been playable in this series, mostly because the dev teams didn't want to add one member of the team but not allocate 3 other character slots to the rest of them. But I say screw it. This is Marvel vs. Capcom 4, and since the team is back in the spotlight with their new movie and the upcoming Doomsday and Secret Wars, I think it only makes sense to include an FF member on the roster. I ended up going with Ben over Reed, Sue, and Johnny, primarily because this roster is in desperate need of some big bruiser characters, and because I think you would have the most fun moveset out of the rest of the team. Maybe not the most creative, but when your options are 3 schmucks and 1 giant rock dude, I'm picking the giant rock dude every time. I would imagine Ben would play something like a mix between Hagar and Juggernaut, a good amount of grappling on top of big swinging punches that makes it difficult for other characters to approach. For his supers, maybe you can have the other members of the Fantastic Four join in for an attack, like maybe having Johnny do a big full screen fire blast, Sue giving Ben armor from her force fields, or just having all of them team up for a big level 3 hyper combo. And finally, for our last Capcom character, Nero from Devil May Cry. So we're all just expecting this to happen, right? When Marvel vs. Capcom 3 released in 2011, Devil May Cry 4 was only a couple of years old at that point, and while Nero was mostly well liked, it's clear that he still needed a little bit more time before moving up to the big leagues of Marvel vs. Capcom. That and the devs wanted Trish instead. Flash forward 8 years and Devil May Cry 5 releases and quickly becomes one of the greatest character action games ever made, giving us a complete upgrade for Nero both design and gameplay wise. For this game, he'd carry over pretty much every tool he has in DMC5. Sword slashes that can be revved up to do more damage, pistol shots, countless devil breakers that would give him insane versatility, and a devil trigger similar to Dante and Virgil's that would make him a nightmare to fight against. Nero's moveset pretty much writes itself, and he's an easy shoo-in for the next Marvel vs. Capcom game. I honestly feel like I don't need to say much else. So there's the base roster for Marvel vs. Capcom 4. 40 characters, 12 of which being brand new to the series, with a good mix of new and old, classic and modern, and basically everything else in between. It's not perfect, you could definitely criticize the amount of X-Men characters or lack of obscure picks on both sides, but I think it does a good enough job for a new Marvel vs. Capcom game. However, I'm not quite finished yet, as I have one more idea for the roster, which is to introduce a new type of playable character. In the Super Smash Bros. Series, there have been several characters that share so many moves and specials with other fighters, mostly because they were easier to develop for and allowed for an easy way to squeeze a few more playable characters onto the roster. In Smash Ultimate, they gave this type of character the classification of Echo Fighters, and I say we take this idea and add it into this game. Marvel Comics has hundreds of characters that have taken on the mantle of another character, and many of these characters are super beloved but may not be considered unique enough to have their own roster slot. Therefore, I say for these types of characters, we take a fighter already on the roster, adjust some of their attributes, maybe add a couple of new moves, and boom, you have a brand new character with about half as much effort as a regular fighter would take to develop for. It's a pretty ambitious idea, but one that I fully believe companies should do more often. It's pretty much what Capcom did for secret characters back in the old Marvel vs. Capcom games, so I don't see why they couldn't do something similar here. But let's say that for whatever reason, Capcom wouldn't want to go through the effort of slightly modifying the movesets of pre-existing characters. What would we do then? Easy. Do what Marvel Rivals did. In Rivals, Loki has a Lady Loki skin which completely changes their model and voice lines, but keeps gameplay and animations the same. That's pretty much what Injustice 2 did with its premiere skins for characters like Green Lantern and Supergirl as well. So let's just do that in order to make the roster appear more varied, while also saving on some of the game's budget in order to spend that on other parts of the game. Smash Ultimate had 7 Echo Fighters, while Injustice 2 had 10 premiere skins. So for this game, I say we meet close to the middle and add 8 of these clone characters / costumes. As for a name for these characters, when I was first envisioning this roster years and years ago, I thought the name Variant Characters would be fitting as a bit of a reference to variant cover comic books. But the MCU went and made that an actual term anyway, so using it now may make things a little confusing for general audiences. So let's just call them Legacy Characters, since that's the term used for when a comic character takes on the mantle of another character anyway. Also, even though I only used Marvel as an example here, the Capcom side would obviously still get Legacy Characters too, since they also like to have incredibly similar characters filling in roles of another, or just flat out cloning a different character to bump up the roster size. Starting out, we have probably the most obvious Legacy character with Spider-Man Miles Morales. Out of all the characters I'm about to talk about, this is probably the one you can most justify being their own unique character, considering how many different powers and abilities he has when compared to Peter, but I think he could still work as a Legacy character. For Miles, I would base him a little around how he plays in the Insomniac games, where he takes a bit more damage, doesn't attack as fast, and has slightly weaker combos, but I would have a lot of those attributes change when he activates his Venom powers, which would greatly increase his damage and speed for a short time. Whether he's a Legacy character or not, Miles is 100% going to be in the next Marvel vs. Capcom game in some way, since his character has grown to be pretty much on par with Peter in terms of popularity, so it's only a matter of time if you ask me. The next somewhat obvious Legacy character, Ken Masters. He's already an Echo in Smash Bros, so might as well make him one here. It's kind of wild how long Ken has been away from this series, and I think he's long overdue for a comeback. Otherwise, I don't really have much to say about Ken. Just base him around how he plays in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, maybe give him a few of his moves from Street Fighter 6, and that's about it. For another somewhat obvious pick, we have War Machine. Rhodey is interesting because when it comes to the core Marvel vs. Capcom series, he was actually playable before Iron Man was due to some weird legal rights issue with Acclaim in the 90s. However, that's obviously not a factor anymore, and the character has evolved quite a lot since his debut as a straight up reskin of Iron Man. To represent War Machine's massive armory of weapons, I would make him tankier and slower, but with a higher damage output and more of an emphasis on projectiles when compared to Iron Man's moveset. Back to Capcom, we have Proto Man over Mega Man. This one would be pretty easy to add since the two characters already play pretty similar to each other in their own series. While Mega Man is a bit of an all-rounder, Proto Man is a glass cannon that takes more damage but also deals more out, which would be very easy to implement in a game like this. On top of that, you could add his shield mechanic from his home series, wherein he could automatically block attacks when jumping in the air. Though if that's a bit much, then you could just have him take less damage from air combos in general. In Mega Man 9 and 10, Proto Man exclusively had the charge shot and slide, but ideally Mega Man would still have those in his base moveset for this game, so maybe as a bit of a switch up, Proto Man could lose any Mega Man 11 related upgrades that Rock would receive in this game, since Blues didn't show up in 11. A bit of an easy pick, but next we have Abomination over the Hulk. Abomination is a classic Hulk enemy, but I can't really imagine how he would play differently from the Big Green Rage monster, which I think makes him perfect as a Legacy character. Same old routine here, does less damage, but could be a little faster and bulkier since Emil Blonsky is different from Bruce, and how he maintains his intelligence in his Gamma form at the cost of not being able to change back, at least in the comics. Next, another easy one, Apollo Justice from Ace Attorney. Honestly, a ton of different characters could work as Legacy characters for Phoenix Wright, but I'm going with Apollo since his game was the first in the series where you play as a completely different character than Nick for its entirety. Sorry to all the Edgeworth fans out there. Anyway, Apollo would probably require a decent amount of changes when compared to other Legacy characters. Obviously he would have different stats like not being as strong as Phoenix, but being much faster to compensate since he's younger and less experienced. But what I'm referring to specifically is how his evidence mechanic works. Apollo would have to have his own unique pieces of evidence that wouldn't stack on top of Nick's evidence, in the case scenario where you would have the two of them on the same team. Honestly, it's not that big of an issue, you would just have to change all of Phoenix's evidence pieces to be more tailored to Apollo, which shouldn't be too difficult of a task. Also, instead of bringing out Maya for assistance, maybe Apollo could bring out Trucy or Athena for a few of his moves. For the last Marvel Legacy character, this might be a bit of a controversial pick, but I'm going with Wolverine Laura Kinney, aka X-23. I say this might be controversial because taking a fully established character who already had her own moveset and essentially downgrading her into being more of a clone of an already pre-existing character might ruffle a few feathers. However, just because she would play closer to Logan doesn't mean she would be completely lacking in originality, since you could easily give her a few of her old moves from Marvel 3 while still tweaking her so that her fans from that game wouldn't be too alienated if they wanted to pick her up in this game. Anyway, Laura would have a lot of the same attributes she had in Marvel 3, having insane grounded mobility but at the cost of having shorter range and less combo options overall. Though you could really change her however you see fit, given how her all-new Wolverine rebranding helped to greatly flesh out her character and make her a big name in the comics compared to when she first debuted in Marvel 3. And for the last legacy character, a bit of a bland note to end on, but it's Lilith from Darkstalkers. Given Morgan's insane popularity, it only makes sense to put Lilith in this game as well, and her inclusion would add another Darkstalker to the roster, which is always a good thing. Since she's a bit shorter than Morgan, I would make her a bit faster and weaker, but she could do way more damage to compensate, and be a bit of a glass cannon character. On top of that, you could have her focus more on a rushdown playstyle, kinda like how she is in Darkstalkers, which would help her contrast from Morgan, who's a bit more of a zoner. So there's the final base roster for Marvel vs. Capcom 4, with 40 playable characters, 28 returning characters, 12 brand new characters, and 8 legacy characters or special costumes that you can either put on the main character select screen or just use as a color swap. Probably a little unrealistic, but I don't think the addition of legacy characters would be too difficult to implement. Though, as I've said before, I'm not a game designer, so I don't really know what's too much or too little for a title like this. However, if you thought we were done here, oh boy, you are sorely mistaken. Stages, the thing that separates the white bread eating training mode purists from the real connoisseurs. The Marvel vs. Capcom series has never really been known for its stage offerings. Sure, they're all well crafted and decently memorable, but they also feel a little generic. Like, if I'm playing a crossover fighting game as massive as this one, I would expect to be fighting in actual iconic locations as opposed to a quiz show, a circus, a mountainside. Like, if I told you this was from Mega Man Legends, would you really believe me? And that's not even going into Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite stages being these barren wastelands devoid of all life with dull visuals and hardly any thought or care. So yeah, I think the stage selection needs to be greatly overhauled for Marvel vs. Capcom 4. I don't want to add too many stages to the game, but I think something like 12 stages specifically based around iconic Marvel and Capcom named locations would be more than enough for the base game at least. This number wouldn't include the mandatory training stage, which would just be the X-Men Danger Room again because don't fix what isn't broken, or any story mode related stages. More on that later. First up, Avengers Tower After Party. Yes, we already had an Avengers Tower stage in the last game, but the idea I had for this one was to have it be set at night with tons of Marvel and Capcom characters just shooting the shit and having a party in the background of your match. Basically imagine the party boat stage from Street Fighter Alpha 2, but throw in a ton of Marvel and Capcom characters that aren't a part of the base roster. The party boat stage from Alpha 2 is a very memorable location from that game, solely because of all the character cameos they snuck in the background, so to do something similar here would be very cool to see. For the first Capcom stage, we have Metro City. Marvel 3 and Infinite already had Metro City stages, but this one would be based directly on its appearance in Street Fighter 6. Ideally in the Times Square-like area you visit at the start of World Tour mode. On top of having onlookers watching your fight, you could also lit up the stage with a ton of different Easter eggs on the Jumbotrons in the background. The vibe might be a little too similar to the City That Never Sleeps stage from UMVC 3, but as I said earlier, Street Fighter 6 has been big for the franchise, so if we're not going to pull a character from that game, we might as well throw in a stage. And I think this is the best option in terms of memorable locales. Back to Marvel, and for this stage we're going to the mutant island of Krakoa. The Krakoan age has been a huge deal for the X-Men, and has been widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest X-Men eras of all time, so I think it only makes sense to add a stage for it. You can set it pretty much anywhere on the island, from the House of X, the Cradle, the Quiet Council throne room, basically anywhere as it appears in Marvel Rivals. The point is that Krakoa is a very important location for the X-Men, and it's about time it starts getting some more love in media. Next up is Wily Castle from Mega Man. Imagine this one as a bit of a mix between the Smash Bros. Stage and the Wily stage from the original Marvel vs. Capcom. Just have a bunch of Mets and Robot Masters running around in the background, and maybe even have them get into a big fight with a bunch of Ultron drones as well, since he's Marvel's premier robot character. Back to Marvel, I mentioned my disappointment over the lack of Fantastic Four representation in this franchise, so to alleviate that, let's give Dr. Doom his very own stage with Latveria. For this stage, you could either set it in the streets of Doomstat, or maybe even have it set in the Castle Doom courtroom, where Dr. Doom could be watching over your fight in the background, kind of like how Daredevil did in the Hand stage for Marvel 3. Obviously, if you have Doom selected in the match, then he'd be replaced by a Doombot, or he just wouldn't be there at all. If you want to add a bit of Capcom love to the stage, then you could potentially have some RE8 Lycans or other characters from that game present in the background, since the village in RE8 feels very aesthetically similar to Latveria. Next stage, kind of an obvious one, but the Devil May Cry shot from Devil May Cry. Ever since I saw the Marvel 3 cinematic of Deadpool and Dante fighting in a bar similar to the DMC headquarters, I have desperately wanted a stage based on Devil May Cry, so let's throw one in here. Either based on its appearance in DMC 5, or as an amalgamation of all of its appearances in the franchise. In the background you can have DMC characters like Lady, Trish, and V, but you could also have some Marvel Monster Hunters or occult characters like Elsa Bloodstone, Werewolf by Night, and Man-Thing chilling in the background watching the fight. Another obvious pick, but Wakanda. Marvel Infinite did have a fusion Monster Hunter Wakanda map, but this is just going to be the technologically advanced nation all on its own. I would place this one similar to the Latveria stage, either on the city streets, inside or outside the Royal Palace, or maybe even at the arena T'Challa earned the Black Panther mantle, or its movie equivalent at Warrior Falls. Next up, Astera from Monster Hunter World. Really, any of the main settlement / gathering hubs from World Rise or Wilds could work. I just picked this one since World is still currently the best selling game in the series at the moment. Alternatively, you could also have the stage set in the ancient forest and have some giant Marvel monsters roaming around in the background, like Devil Dinosaur or some other Savage Land monsters. For the penultimate Marvel stage, we have Clintar. Like with Krakoa, this stage would be heavily inspired by its appearance in Marvel Rivals, with towering symbiote-based structures and lots of alien flora and fauna and symbiote creatures roaming around. Perhaps you could also have Null observing the match from a distance, though that could make it a little too similar to the Latveria stage, so maybe not. Next up, the Raccoon Police Station. Resident Evil definitely deserves a new stage, but there's so many iconic locations to choose from, like the Spencer Mansion, the Spanish Village from RE4, the Unnamed Village in RE8, but I'm going with the RPD since the RE2 remake was a massive success for Capcom, and because we already gave RE4 some love by basing Leon on his appearance from that game. Anyway, the stage would be dark, grimy, and mysterious just like how it was in the original game, and including a bunch of zombies, BOWs, and spooky characters from both companies would help with the overall vibe for the stage as well. For the final Marvel stage, we have the planet of Sakaar, more specifically in the gladiatorial battle arena from Planet Hulk. I wanted some sort of battle arena or tournament stage, but I thought it would be too obvious to delegate that to Street Fighter. So I think basing a stage around Planet Hulk would not only make the stage more visually unique since it's on an alien planet, but would also help to represent a wider variety of locations from Marvel Comics. Anyway, I don't have a ton of notes for this stage. You can make it sandy or color it based on how the planet looks in Thor Ragnarok, but so long as the stage is full of life and background Easter eggs, then it would be fine. And for the final Capcom stage, we have the courtroom from Ace Attorney, an absolutely iconic location to base a stage around that I'm shocked hasn't been added to the series yet. I would imagine it being based around the wide shots you get in the series where defense attorneys and prosecutors from both Marvel and Capcom would be duking it out, while the main fight occurs from the perspective of the witness stand. When the battle ends, maybe you could change the KO screen to be in the style of the Ace Attorney guilty and not guilty graphics that play at the end of a trial, alongside the judge bringing down the gavel and confetti raining down from the ceiling. So there you have it, 12 stages from all across Marvel and Capcom, packed to the brim with fan service and references from as many different franchises as possible. However, there's one more core element of this hypothetical Marvel vs. Capcom 4 that would have just as much, if not more, fan service than the stages, that being the story mode. I'll try to keep this section brief because this could easily devolve into pure fanfiction, and because, to be honest, I don't know if this game absolutely needs a story mode. Story modes in fighting games are incredibly hit or miss, and they're sort of becoming a dying breed, at least when it comes to Capcom games specifically. Granted, that's because the story modes for Street Fighter V and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite are absolutely dreadful, but the point still stands. I respect World Tour mode in Street Fighter VI for foregoing the traditional story mode, in favor of being more of an adventure mode that excellently teaches the player how the game functions, but something like that wouldn't really work for a massive crossover like Marvel vs. Capcom. So if we want to include a substantial single player mode to this game, you kind of have to include a story mode. So for MVC4 story, I think it would be best to try and base it on an actual Marvel comic storyline rather than attempting to write a wholly original one. You could base it off Infinity Gauntlet, War of the Realms, hell maybe even Secret Wars since that's about to get a lot of love and attention soon. Essentially just take one of these stories, but find a natural way to insert the Capcom cast and have them meet, fight, and team up against a super powerful boss at the end. You can make the main villain Doom, Wesker, Loki, Thanos, Null, Annihilus, that weird orb thing from Okami, Big Wheel. I don't really have a preference, so long as the story is something that oozes charm and passion, unlike the half-hearted slog that Infinite story was. Presentation-wise, I think it would be smart and cost-effective to not present the story exclusively through fully animated cutscenes like Infinite did. I think treating it sort of like a visual novel with emoting portraits and minimal animation like how Blazblue does its story modes would be a fine enough method to present the story and would be similar to the comic book roots of the Marvel characters. Hell, Street Fighter V and 6 already do something like this for their arcade modes, so I think it would be more than enough for a game like this. That's not to say there wouldn't be a few fully animated cutscenes, but they should be scarce or present only during super important story beats like at the start, the end, or before a major boss or event. And to wrap things up, let's just go over a lot of miscellaneous features, details, and anything else I would throw into Marvel vs. Capcom 4. For modes, the game would obviously have the standard arcade, training, online, and rank modes that most fighting games launch with. Having a mission mode or something like Heroes and Heralds in Marvel 3 could be a good way to add some more single player content to the game, and it could also serve as a good place to unlock some extra costumes or cosmetics. I would love for there to be a ton of alternate costumes for characters in this game, but given how long it takes Capcom to make costumes for Street Fighter 6, I don't know how likely adding them in would be. If Capcom does do all costumes though, they're probably going to be locked behind microtransactions, which is pretty lame. So the only solution I would do to make it sting a little bit less would be to have whatever currency they intend to add be obtainable by actually playing the game. What a concept! For online modes, it would be cool if 3v3/2v2 teams could be player controlled, and having raid bosses you and your friends could take on would be even more fun. I'm on and off if the game should have an online lobby hub system like what a lot of other fighting games have, mostly because I don't like them very much. But I'm sure I'm in the minority there given how they keep popping up, so let's just put one in here. Maybe you can do what Street Fighter did and have all of the 90s Marvel vs. Capcom games playable in the lobby as well. For some more miscellaneous details, rollback. Obviously, crossplay, opponent ping/Wi-Fi and wired indicators, replay overtake combo creators, and frame data/hitbox viewers are things I think literally every fighting game should have in the modern day. A sort of museum or gallery mode would be cool, basically serving as a place where you could view a bunch of concept art, music, and interviews from not only this game but other games in the franchise as well. The MVC collection already has something like this, so you could really just drag and drop a lot of the files there and place them into here, while also including some new stuff from this game and some of the more modern titles in the series. And finally, since this is Marvel vs. Capcom 4 and because it's a modern fighting game, let's quickly run through DLC. I've got 4 DLC packs of 4 characters each, wherein half of the pack will be returning characters and the other half will be brand new to the series. I really wanted to do 4 packs of 6 characters each, but a lot of fighting games have been dropping down to 4 characters per pack nowadays, so we're just going to be realistic and stick with 4 characters. On top of the 4 characters, each pack will also come with a new legacy fighter and 2 new stages as bonuses. 4 characters in 2 stages might be pushing development a bit too much, but as I said earlier, I want this game to be a celebration of the Marvel vs. Capcom series as a whole, so I think it really needs to go all out in keeping players invested in the game. And as one last note, I also loosely base each DLC pack around a theme, but I try not to let that affect the character picks too much. Anyway, DLC Pack 1, Clash of Gods. We got Moon Knight, Asura from Asura's Wrath, Thanos, and Virgil from Devil May Cry, with the legacy fighter being Jane Foster's Mighty Thor and the stages being the planet Titan and Naraka from Asura's Wrath. There are probably better locations from Asura's Wrath that you could pull stages from, like the Karma Fortress to name one, but I thought that Naraka would serve as a cool backdrop visually, alongside having a unique visual identity, which is also why I chose Titan as a stage set on a dead alien world. Anyway, DLC Pack 1 characters for most fighting games are typically reserved for some of the big hitters that just barely missed out on making onto the base roster, which is absolutely the case here. Thanos has kind of gotten a little too much screen time as of late, but I won't deny that he isn't a massively popular character that does deserve a chance in a new, non-infinite Marvel vs. Capcom game, so I say let's give him another chance here, maybe with some more Infinity Stone themed moves. I really wanted Virgil on the base roster, but he's cursed to only appear in DLC and re-releases until the end of time, so I had to keep the tradition up here. Sorry. For new characters, we have Asura and Moon Knight. Asura's Wrath wasn't the biggest Capcom game when it was released, but it definitely has a hardcore following around it. And Moon Knight is kind of in a similar boat as well, even after getting some MCU love. For the DLC, I kind of want to go the Smash Bros route of trying to make the impossible happen. I think back to a lot of those reveal trailers and remember how hype-inducing they were, and I want to capture a similar feeling with my character picks here. Anyway, onto DLC Pack 2, titled Beat 'em Up Bash, featuring characters that have all appeared in beat 'em ups before. We have the Punisher, Captain Commando, She-Hulk, and Lin Kurosawa, with the legacy fighter being Claire Redfield over Leon Kennedy, and the stages being Hell's Kitchen and Kamui from Okami. Originally, I just wanted this theme to focus more on street level characters in general, but the problem with doing that for Capcom specifically is that it kind of implies there's going to be a Street Fighter character, which I obviously didn't end up doing, so I pivoted to focusing more on characters from beat 'em ups instead. Captain Commando is a pretty straightforward choice. He's a very popular Capcom character and fits the theming very well. I know Hagar would probably be more appropriate, but I'm a little sick of seeing him after Marvel 3 and Infinite, so I passed on him. I know She-Hulk is a bit of a controversial character after her Disney Plus show, but I think she has a fun personality, and her inclusion in Cosmic Invasion seemed to be well liked, so I'm keeping her. Plus, it is another bruiser character for the roster, so I'll take it. It is genuinely shocking that Frank Castle has never been playable in this series despite being the sole reason that Marvel and Capcom worked together in the first place, and Lin Kurosawa is probably the most out there character pick one could have for a game like this. In case you didn't know, Lin is one of the playable characters from the Capcom produced Alien vs Predator arcade game, and has basically been trapped in legal limbo ever since, in spite of her being a fan favorite character that Capcom have been trying to get into a new game for decades. Under normal circumstances, I would completely disregard her appearing in a game like this. However, Disney does own both Alien and Predator now, so this might be the only chance Capcom could have to get her into something, so I say let them cook. Claire as a legacy fighter over Leon might be a bit of a stretch and might take a little bit of tweaking, but I think it could still work and would give the RE2 remake some more love. Hell's Kitchen isn't a very inspired stage choice, but I think the game could do with a grimy looking city street stage. I picked Kamui as the Okami stage, but really you could pick any area to represent the game. Shinshu Field, Kamiki Village, any location would work and would look absolutely gorgeous in a Marvel vs. Capcom game, especially if they keep some of Okami's original art style choices. DLC Pack 3 Magic Mayhem, with the characters being Scarlet Witch, Nina from Breath of Fire, Blackheart, and Jedha from Darkstalkers, with the legacy character being Carnage over Venom, and the stages being the Sanctum Sanctorum and the Fetus of God from Darkstalkers, though that last one might need a bit of tweaking to not raise the age rating. This is definitely where the DLC packs start to get a little out there in terms of concept and character picks. Considering we already have a good amount of the must-have characters in this game, I think we can afford to get a little creative and wacky. Jedha and Blackheart may not be the most conventional picks, but as stated previously, more Darkstalkers is always a good thing, and Blackheart could help to give former Dormammu players a similar-ish character to mess around with. I know next to nothing about the Breath of Fire series, but I know it's an IP Capcom has been heavily sleeping on, so I think throwing the fans a bone would get a lot of people excited and could hopefully turn some people onto the series. And then there's the Scarlet Witch, serving as Marvel's main magic user for the game over Doctor Strange. I think Steven is great, but I want to see how Capcom can design a new magic user for a game like this, and Wanda is pretty much the de facto choice after him. She's got loads of moveset potential and an extremely dedicated fanbase backing her up, so she's kind of a no-brainer to appear in a game like this. Carnage as a legacy character might be pushing the concept a bit since he definitely has enough to warrant him being his own fighter, but I think he could still work as a variation of Venom. If that doesn't work, then you could always have Wiccan as a legacy character over Scarlet Witch, though that would break the trend of only doing legacy characters for base roster characters, which wasn't a rule I established, it just kind of worked out that way. Whatever, I'm keeping Carnage. The Sanctum Sanctorum is a very iconic Marvel location that I'm surprised hasn't become a stage already, and the Fetus of God is one of the most disturbing things ever put to code, but it's just a stage in Darkstalkers, so I feel like we have to stick with it. If the stage is just a little too extreme for the game though, then you could always just give him Pyron stage Hellstorm, or make an original Majigin stage since that's the realm Jedha rules over. And finally, the last DLC pack, New Age of Heroes. The final 4 DLC characters are Ruby Heart, Cable, Squirrel Girl, and Jean from God Hand, with the legacy character being Strider Hien and the stages being Marvel's 2099 and the Airship from Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Yes, I've 100% been holding off from adding Ruby Heart and Cable purely so I could have them headline the final DLC pack of this hypothetical fighting game. I really would have liked to include a Mingo and Sansan in this game's roster as well, but I know Ruby Heart is far and away the most popular original character in Marvel 2, so I'm just going to stick with her, and Cable pretty much speaks for himself. Squirrel Girl would serve as a bit of a weird pick for the game because as much as I tried, I couldn't justify bringing Dan back over other characters for this roster. Though, given how much of a monster she is in Marvel Rivals, maybe her being considered a weird pick isn't that accurate to say anymore. And lastly, there's Jean from God Hand, who is, pardon the pun, hand in hand with Lyn in terms of characters that have 9 possible chances of being included, but would definitely get a lot of heads turning given how much of a sleeper hit God Hand is. It may seem impossible, but hey, Clover Studio is kind of back now, so never say never. I haven't played the Strider games yet, so I don't know how Strider Hien could differentiate himself from Strider Hiryu, but he did get an alt costume in Infinite, so he does have a bit of a precedent to be included as a legacy fighter. Then for stages, I'll be honest, I kind of ran out of ideas, so I kind of just decided to use a general representation of Marvel's 2099 to fit the somewhat futuristic theme of the DLC pack, alongside bringing back a fan favorite MVC 2 stage. Lazy way to end things, I know, but let's wrap this up. And that's it. That's everything that I would add into a potential Marvel vs. Capcom 4. We've gone over a lot today, and if there's one thing you should take away from all of this, it's that Marvel vs. Capcom is important. From the characters to the gameplay to the visual design, just about every aspect of the series is fighting game excellence, and it's a series that deserves to have a future after all it's done for the genre. It's probably not realistic to expect all this content to show up in a modern day fighting game, but I can't help it. I love Marvel vs. Capcom, and I wanted to get a brand new game so desperately. This series means a lot to me, and I hope it may one day return as the pinnacle of the fighting game genre like it was for so many years. So to Marvel, to Capcom, I hope that one day you can make everyone's dreams come true again, so that you can take us all for a ride once again. Also, please add Shuma-Gorath to the game. I know he didn't have him in my roster, but he's so stupid and I love him so much.